This video documents our experiments to bring motion and movement to our sculptures. For over 10 years, we've been making this type of sculpture. Recently, they've become more and more dynamic, but we'd never actually had them move before.
We're hoping these motions and movements will help tell the full story of how these sites were destroyed.
The first prototype we got to work on was a door. We figured we would have to build a control box for the potter to sit on to allow us to set up the small lever system and opens the door itself. This jar you may recognize from our last film, Moment of Destruction. Two doors opening at once is a much more complicated mechanism, but we even managed to get a squeaking sound into it.
And here we've moved on to the actual casting of the doors out of pewter. And we've got nice strong metal doors that can take the opening and closing and not break down. We've done this in the jar that we exploded and kept separated with clear resin to simulate the moment that the Parthenon was exploded.
Here we have a drawbridge that comes straight out. We built a music box into it that plays the French national anthem. The mechanism to make the drawbridge rise, we didn't use a lever this time. We used a spool system that winds up a string that raises the chains that raises the bridge. We found this great website that has little tiny music boxes of almost any tune that you want. They'll even do custom ones. So we built one into this jar. We then started looking for other types of music devices that could be incorporated into the projects. Several things were tried. I think we were looking for a more earthy sound, something that would be more appropriate to old architecture. We even tried to create the sound of a slow earthquake with a jar full of shards and rocks. This little rotating heart was created for a very special project that we'll show you later in the film.
On this light experiment of motion, we revisited Delphi jar that we had made.
See, the experiment here was to put lights in many places in the jar, including inside the temple, and then have them turn up one at a time. While one is rising, the other is lowering. We used little pentometers so that the voltage would slowly alter as one light rose, another would dim. This Palmyra sculpture we've done a lot of things with. We've made digital images of it and even made some paintings from it. But this time we decided to try to bring colored lights into the background of it to silhouette it. As the colors go from one to the next, it seems to create like an atmosphere.
And so it creates some nice effects with the different combinations of the lights. This is the Garden Tomb in Jerusalem, And what we're trying to do is make the branches cast shadows on the ground in front of it, sort of the way the wind would blow gently branches in front of the tomb to sort of add a more realistic effect.
We added that branch shadow effect to this waterfall. Now, so it has two sets of motion in it. One, the water coming down the waterfall, and the other, the branches slowly swaying. On this one, we just simply ran bubbles from the bottom, bubbling past the sculpture. That created surprising lighting effects.
And so all of this gets magnified by it being in a tube as well. So you have the light combination being magnified as well as the sculpture inside. And the whole place has sort of a otherworldly feel to it.
From that blue water example, we're now going to turn to using real fire. We ended up mounting small lamps into the sides of the inside of the jars to create flickering lamps that would light it up with no electrical lighting.
And the motion is the shadows as they wiggle and move, being cast by the flame.
Sometimes it's a little bright, so we found that we need to kind of hide it around the corner from the view, but if you do it just right, the shadows are crisp and extraordinary. In addition to having movement on the inside, we wanted to have the shards on the outside actually move. This jar broke in one large shard that allowed it to be turned into a moving door. The shard opening really expands the scene, and you can build new arrangements on the pieces, and it would create new geometries and new architectural shapes. One of the most interesting sculptures to come from this project is our effort to recreate the slow motion of this jar as it was hit by a hammer. We used some slow motion footage and then set up mechanical apparatuses inside to duplicate the shapes and patterns of its movement.
So it slowly breaks open, revealing the interior. We're going to build a temple scene inside, a Greek temple scene.
The mechanism and gears to make this thing function were much more complicated than anything up to this point.
This piece is going in each direction.
We installed that small heart that was mentioned earlier into the box at the bottom of this jar so that when the crank is moved, it generates music. One of the most extreme ideas we had was to actually make the interiors collapse as if they were being struck by an earthquake or an explosion or what have you. A series of beads held together by string under tension. By pressing the bottom and releasing the tension slightly and giving it a shake, you get a convincing earthquake. We put it against a green screen and projected a desert, and that way we could test it out. We realized a series of them in perspective, collapsing in sequence, might be very convincing. We would now like to turn to 3 jars that are focused more on a slower form of motion. The first one is this small tomb jar that has a flower pot mounted into the top of it, allowing bulbs to be planted and grow slowly out of the top of it. This next piece is the first attempt we made to make the sun move across from east to west inside the jar. We chose the stone circle at Avesbury as our first test. We managed to set it up so the sun could appear to rise in the east, go across the top of the sky, and then set in the west. The last jar we would like to show is a small Ukrainian jar. The jar was donated to us by a nice lady that deals in pottery in the Ukraine. She sent us an already broken jar and asked us to do something that would publicize the Ukrainian struggle. We chose a site in Lviv where there's a large clock over a passageway that leads to a church. The movement in this jar is defined by the clock, which is slowly ticking away. At this site, wherever to become destroyed, we expect to stop the clock at the time that it happens.